Cardinal, a Batfam Podfic, written and illustrated by TheRoyalLibrarian, and read by Heo Stories. Chapter 16. A Friendly Ambush. Damien is back in the office the next day. Tim can't explain it, but something about him feels different. As Tim expected, Damien shows no visible sign of injury. He works with the same efficiency Tim has come to expect from him, getting his work done in orderly, well-timed fashion. But there's a shift in him, subtle, yet undeniable. He's more subdued. Damon has long since stopped trying to hold back, telling Tim exactly what he thinks at any given moment. It's who he is, blunt and unapologetically himself, but today it's like he's simultaneously holding back but while being more emotional than ever. It's not in anything he says or does outright, but in fleeting expressions Tim catches when Damien thinks no one's watching. Something in his eyes, pained, sad, angry. Damien must know Tim is onto him because he goes out of his way to avoid any sort of one-on-one time with him. Just last week, Damien was insisting on working in Tim's office, almost never letting Tim out of his sight. But now, he barely sets foot inside unless he has to. The last time they saw each other was at the conference. Tim was admittedly acting out of character, but he didn't do anything that should have caused this. Something clearly happened yesterday, and whatever it was, Damien is now dealing with the emotional fallout. And Tim doesn't know what to do about it. Why is Dick when you need him? Emotional intelligence has never been Tim's strong suit, nor almost anybody in the Wayne family for that matter. Though they are much better in this timeline since Bruce is far more open to therapy than he was before. God, this really isn't his job. It wasn't in the last timeline when they were actually related, sort of, and it was sure as hell isn't his responsibility now. Damien is self-sufficient, more than capable of dealing with whatever family drama he's spiraling through without Tim's involvement. But as the day progresses, Tim finds himself more and more distracted, wanting to help despite himself, or at least know what has him out of sorts. So Tim orders lunch and calls Damien in so they can eat together while doing that daily check-in. Damien takes it in stride and they go through their meeting as usual, only without a hint of Damien's usual snark and sass. He's censoring himself, Tim realizes, keeping his words neutral to combat whatever he actually wants to say. He's trying very, very hard not to give something away. Tim knows that feeling all too well, experiences it daily, especially in Damien's presence. But why would Damien need to hide himself away? What does he think Tim might see? Are you feeling alright? Tim asks carefully, once they finished up with all the business talk they need to. His voice is light, but deliberate. Damien tenses just slightly. Why do you ask? You was sick yesterday. Food poisoning, right? Tim shrugs, casually, leaning back in his chair. Sometimes it takes a bit longer than a day to recover. Tim knows full well something so insignificant would never keep Damien down. He isn't injured, which means something else kept him home and is affecting him today. Something that impacted him personally. The league did go after him, Raz, Damien's grandfather. That can't have been a good experience, though Tim wouldn't expect it to affect him so. Ah, Damien relaxes slightly, shoulders dropping with just a touch. I am fine, merely contemplative, I suppose. Tim tilts his head, still watching him closely. There's a long beat of silence before he nods, encouraging him to go on. Off? Damien looks away, jaw tight as if weighing something. His fingers fidget anxiously with the hem of his sleeve. He seems on the verge of retreating into himself, of brushing it off with a quick evasion, while instead he blurts, "Did you like being an only child?" Tim frowns, taken aback. "What?" Damien swallows, his gaze fixed just slightly off of Tim's eyeline. "Did you enjoy being an only child? Did you ever wish Did you ever wish you had siblings?" Tim opens and closes his mouth, unsure how to decipher that question. Something sharp and familiar rising in his chest, a pulse of want, the same one he's buried for years. Family, belonging, the impossible yearning he ignores daily. Those are the dreams of a child. Tim hasn't been a child in a long time. So Tim steadies himself, carefully reconstructing a measure of calm. Not a mask of indifference he knows Damien hates, but a neutral, well, as he should be to such an out of the pocket question. Tim shrugs casually. "I've never known any different, have I?" Damon quickly breaks eye contact, immediately looking down towards his shoes. Tim can't quite see his face now, but he can still see some sort of conflict there Damien is desperately trying to hide. "Are you having some sort of issue with your siblings?" he asks curiously. The last thing he needs right now is to get involved with the Wayne family drama, but he also needs to stay informed in case it's anything serious. Damien picks his plate back up, distracting himself by taking another bite of food. For time or for clarity, Tim isn't sure. Damien shakes his head after a moment, his face moving over again. A mask, Tim can tell, but an effective one. "My brother and I had a disagreement. Many disagreements, actually," Damien says haltingly, his voice low. "He was an only child before my father adopted him, and sometimes I wonder if I preferred it that way." Tim doesn't make a point of keeping it up on the interworking of the family anymore. Generally, they all get along pretty well, much better than before anyway. A family as they always should have been. Sure, they might fight, but no one's tried to kill anyone yet, right? With Damien's description, he could literally be talking about any of the Wayne children. They were all only children whose parents were taken away by some unforeseen horrific circumstance before Bruce took them in. So Tim really doesn't know who he's talking about. But then, it doesn't really matter. "I doubt it," he says sincerely. Damien finally looks at him properly. "Really?" he asks softly, like it's surprising, like he genuinely has no idea if that's true or not. Damien doesn't know how lucky he's been, especially in this timeline. Sure, he had to grow up with the League, but Tim's intervention that time was as minimal as possible. Long before Raz would have had him doing truly horrific things, and once Damien did arrive at the manor, he was welcome, wanted. Tim knows how vicious that Damien's siblings can be, but at their core, they love each other, want what's best for one another. He knows because he did, despite all the vitriol they spat at him over the years. Tim couldn't help but care. Couldn't help but hope they cared about him too deep down. "Really?" Tim affirms. Damien fidgets. You you don't think he would have been better off?" Tim shakes his head automatically. "No, I don't think that'd be possible. You're a good kid, Damien, and I bet you're an even better brother." The words feel a bit like glass coming out of Tim's throat. Not because he doesn't think it's true. No, Damien cares for his own with fierceness unmatched, but because, well, Tim wishes he could have had the chance to experience it for himself. Damien's eyes go a bit pained for some reason, doubtful, almost guilty. And Tim doesn't know what comes over him. He just knows he can't let that stand. Look, Tim leans forward, trying to catch his gaze. Everyone makes mistakes. Sometimes we say things we don't mean. Sometimes we say things to people we care about because we know just how much it will hurt them. Love is a double-edged sword that way. It leaves us vulnerable to be hurt worse. I may not have the most experience, but he smiles bittersweetly and shrugs. Well, brothers fight. That's normal enough, isn't it? For a second, Tim thinks Damien's eyes go a bit glassy, but he blinks, and it's gone in an instant. There's an intensity there, though something raw and fragile that looks suspiciously like hope. I hope you're right, he says, finally relaxing a fraction, more than he had the rest of the day anyway. They finish their lunch in an odd silence, and Tim isn't quite sure how much he's helped, but at least he tried. He's itching to go snooping onto this man's CCTV to see what exactly went down yesterday. But with Oracle upping the security, he'd really rather not risk the wrath of her or the rest of the bats. He needs to play his cards right now more than ever. Whatever the family squabble is, he's sure it will resolve it in time. They always do. The rest of the day goes by peacefully enough. Damien's still oddly reserved, but steadily relaxing as time goes by. Tim takes it as a win. Meanwhile, Tim starts surreptitiously adding heightened security measures to the Drake Industries building in case the League comes snooping around here. You'd like to hope Ross coming after Damien in broad daylight was an isolated event, but at this point he wouldn't put anything past him. He sets up an alert system on his laptop that will immediately notify him if there's any breach, whether it's unauthorized access, rooftop intrusions, hacking attempts, or any other suspicious activity in or around the building. That is why he should have some warning, even if it's just a few minutes before they come in force. Tim has had no luck on any of his many attempts to reach Talia either, meaning she's deep into hiding, captured, or ignoring him. Tim isn't sure which option is worse. He knows Talia cares about her son, so why is she abandoning him when he needs her most? The hours slip by, and Tim doesn't even realize the workday has come to an end until Damien knocks on his door once and lets himself in. Tim spares him a quick glance, expecting some sort of update before he leaves to go home, but he just lingers in the doorway, oddly still. The silence drags long enough that Tim looks up again properly. Damien's posture is straight, jaw set, but there's something taut behind his eyes, something not exactly comfortable. Determination, perhaps. Everything alright? Tim asks, carefully. Damien nods, sharp and immediate. Yes, it's just. He hesitates for a second before going on, voice firmer. Alfred won't be able to pick me up tonight. Something came up. Tim frowns, mentally conjuring up multiple explanations for why that could be. Some harmless, some catastrophic. But Damien doesn't seem stressed, though, just weirdly tense, so it could be nothing. Tim jolts after a few seconds, realizing he still hasn't responded. Is someone else coming for you then? Dick and Jason pick Damien up often enough. It's not exactly out of the ordinary. They could be, Damien says evenly, but it would take them 20 minutes minimum to get here. You drove me the other day and we live next door to each other. Logically, it would make more sense for you to take me again. His eyes flick to Tim's still open laptop and expressions hardens. He glares at Tim, an expression far more familiar than how he's been acting all day. And you shouldn't be staying late anyway. Tim furrows his brows as the meaning finally clicks. You want to ride? Well, since you offered, that'd be lovely, thank you. Tim blinks. Wait, what? That isn't what I'm waiting. Tim gawks. I still have work! Come on, Drake. Damien rolls his eyes. I don't intend to wait an eternity for your willful spite to finally run dry. Tim's eyes widen as his jaw drops a bit. God of God. That, that almost felt like something Damien would have said to him before, but with a lot less bite and more fondness. Damien seems to realize it too. His shoulders tense slightly, his expression faltering for just a second, like he's unsure if he crossed the line, but Tim just lets his lips twitch upward into a small smile. Tim rolls his eyes, feigning annoyance, and stands to grab his things. He's gotten far too soft. I think you'll find my willful spite is endless. Tim snarks right back at him as he passes Damien without another word. Damien relaxes a bit and scoffs. Now why does that surprise me? He mutters, following him. Tim leads Damien onto the elevator and down into the parking garage. Damien gets in the car wordlessly, and within minutes they're on their way. The air between them feels odd, different than the oddity of the rest of the day, almost charged with something. Nervousness? Anticipation? They get to Wang Manor quickly enough. Tim waits a moment for the gates at the entrance of the property to open. Once they do, he drives up the long driveway and pulls to a stop at the main entrance of the manor. He pulls the car in park, glancing over at Damien, waiting for him to hop out. Only he doesn't. Damien just sort of curls into himself sheepishly. Tim raised an eyebrow. Damien, we're here. Damien nods once, eyes forward. Yes. Tim waits another second, glazing around. You gonna get out? Damien clears his throat. Right, of course. He grabs his bag and pushes himself out of the car just as the front door bursts open. There you are, baby. Jason explains. I was wondering where my little brother went. Tim flinches. Did he just say Todd? Damien growls, an angry scowl on his face. Tim's mind freezes, rewind, and then short circuits. Okay, weird. He must have misheard, right? That's the only explanation for that. Tim observes Damien's fierce glare towards Jason. Guess it's the two of them who've been fighting then. Doesn't matter. Not his circus, not his monkeys, and all that. Dick pushes his way out next, ruffling Damien's hair and giving Tim a wave. Thanks for bettering him, Tim. Tim nods once. Course, he mutters, a bit dazed. I'll see you, Damien. Damien waves goodbye, his expression still tight and guilty. Tim doubles back the way he came, the familiar curve of the driveway winding beneath his tires as he approached the gates to exit the manor grounds. He slows to a stop and waits for a moment for them to open, eyes flickering towards the metal structure as the seconds tick by. And tick by. And keep ticking. Nothing happens. He frowns, glancing at the dashboard clock. 1 minute, then 2, then 5. Still, the gates won't budge. They used to be manual, but Bruce eventually upgraded them to a motion-sensitive system, mostly so Alfred didn't have to trudge out in the rain whenever a visitor came by. Tim taps the steering wheel impatiently, then sighs and throws the car into park. Tim gets out of his car and is just about to reach for his phone when he spots movement down the driveway. A figure in casual clothes sprinting towards him with long, fast strides. Duke. Sorry, man, he calls to him as he closes the remaining distance, slightly out of breath. The gates are charmed. Tim just stares at him in disbelief. What? All of them? Duke nods with a helpless shrug. Yeah, I don't know. Some sort of electrical failure. Tim looks up at the massive wrought iron gates. They spiral and twist upwards in intricate patterns, still rising at least 20 feet high and reinforced by some brick walls that surround the rest of the property. Getting off the grounds on foot would be easy. There were wooded paths and side doors, but for vehicles, these gates and the two others on the opposite ends of the estate were the only way out. They were just working, Tim mutters with a frown. What the hell could have happened in 2 minutes it took for me to drop Damien off? Duke raises his brows and gives a small shrug. I should say, beats me. Bruce is calling a mechanic now, he adds, but it might be a few hours before someone gets here. Tim balks. A few hours? Yep. Duke flips, not seeming the least bit apologetic. Tim stares. Why don't you just come inside? Duke suggests easily. Alfred almost has dinner done. The gears in Tim's head start to turn. They did a good job of strong arming Tim into dinner with them last time, though it obviously didn't go the way they planned. Is this supposed to be round two? It is, isn't it? That explains Damien's odd behavior. They set him up, didn't they? Damien was the lure to get Tim here, and now conveniently is unable to leave. Tim tilts his head back and huffs. He has to hand it to them. It's a solid attempt, subtle, coordinated, but Tim barely manages the last family dinner. He's not about to suffer through another one, no matter how strong Bruce's instinct is to adopt every stray that crosses the threshold. Tim's not playing along. Not this time. Tim shakes his head. Sorry, Duke, but I can't do that. Duke's eyes widen slightly. What? Why not? Tim lifts a shoulder in a casual shrug. I've got things to do tonight. It's fine, I'll just walk home. At least Damien isn't in his immediate vicinity to correct him this time. Duke frowns. No, he says firmly. It's getting dark out and it's due to rain soon. Your place is over a mile away. Tim shakes his head stubbornly, swallowing with a bit of difficulty. I'm sorry, but I can't. He insists, voice rougher than he intends it to be. Duke's expression shifts, his eyes softening, not with pity exactly, but something frustratingly close. As if he knows, as if he can just see just how hard this is for Tim. Which is impossible, obviously. Duke sighs, giving a slight nod. Okay, at least come back to the house for a second. We'll get your car parked in the meantime, and I'm sure Bruce would prefer to call you a cab. Tim eyes him skeptically, but ultimately doesn't protest. It's not like they really could hold him here against his will. He exhales through his nose before sliding back into the driver's seat. He jerks his head towards the passenger side. Get in. Duke obliges, climbing into the passenger seat as Tim throws the car into gear. They drive back up the long driveway in silence, the mansion looming larger with each second. Duke gestures towards a spot near the west side of the garage, and Tim pulls in without comment. Duke gets out and starts towards the house, tossing a casual "come in" over his shoulder. Tim follows hesitatingly, wary of whatever they have up their sleeve for him. Duke opens the door into the entrance and leads him in. Damien, Jason, and Dick are nowhere to be seen. Bruce rushes down the stairs instead, an apologetic look on his face. Tim, good to see you. Sorry about the gates. I really have no idea what happened there. I just called my guy. Hopefully, we can get them back up and running real soon. Bruce's demeanor is odd. The last time Tim was here, Bruce mostly acted like himself, throwing a bit of Brucey in there so as to not seem suspicious. Now, it's like Brucey, but in another font. He's tense, drawn in on himself in a way that's so him. But he's usually able to drop that when he puts on his Brucey act. It's like he can't help it. Like he's trying so hard to appear unbothered and at ease that Brucey is the only thing he can conjure up. Tim nods slowly, his eyes narrow. Right. Bruce clears his throat. We were just about to sit down for dinner. Why don't you join us? Hopefully, we can get this thing sorted quickly and we can get you home. That won't be necessary, Mr. Wayne. Tim denies, tone polite but firm. I really need to be getting home. It's not far. I don't mind walking. Bruce frowns slightly. It's Bruce and Tim and walking? It's almost dark. Tim forces himself to smile pleasantly, but he can feel it's a bit too tight. Then I'll call a cab. Really, I have things I need to be working on tonight. No, please stay. I insist. At least let me make up for the inconvenience. Tim can feel his smile starting to crack at the edges, his forced pleasantness straining. No, he said bluntly. Thank you, but I'm afraid I can't. Bruce's eyes narrow and his jaw sets. Warning bells instantly start going off in Tim's head. That look is a sign to every Robin that they will listen and obey if they know what's good for them, regardless if Bruce is right or wrong. It's a look Tim has seen right before the bad blow up fights between Bruce and Dick, between Bruce and Jason, between Bruce and, well, basically everyone. Tim has seen with his own eyes how fighting against that look can end in literal blood and broken bonds. But Tim was never Robin, never Bruce's problem, and certainly never his son. That look has no authority over him. Bruce has no authority over him. Bruce opens his mouth, and Tim braces himself for a dose of heavy handed authority when Alfred comes into the entry instead. Bruce closes his mouth. Master Tim. Alfred bows his head slightly. Thank you for bringing young Master Damien home. I'm afraid we had a bit of a mishap in the kitchen earlier. Tim hums, nonplussed, bring himself back to his equilibrium. Nothing too serious, I hope. Not at all. Everything is sorted out now, but I'm terribly sorry about the inconvenience with guests. I'm sure you'll join us for dinner? Tim fidgets and swallows. Actually, it was so very sudden, your last departure. Alfred continues as if Tim hadn't spoken. It's good hospitality is a dying art in this world, but one I uphold with the highest regard. I'd hate to have been a poor host. Tim blinks. No, you. No, of course you weren't. I'm glad to hear it, Alfred says, but I'm afraid your manners are too kind. Please allow me to rectify my earlier failure by serving you a proper meal. He steps aside with a graceful gesture, practically herding Tim inside without ever laying a hand on him. Tim feels the invisible leash tighten around his neck. He can't say no to Alfred, not when he's insisting like this. Not when he's somehow taking his last visit as soon sort of personal failure of his part. Tim would get quite a bit of personal vindictive pleasure refusing Bruce. But Alfred? It's Alfred. Without any sort of approval from his higher brain abilities, Tim finds himself acquiescing, allowing Bruce and Duke to usher him deeper into the house. Still, Tim can't help but lean over towards Duke, the most normalish person in the whole family, or at least he allows people to think he is. Be real with me. Is there any way I'm getting out of this? He whispers conspiratorially. Duke actually laughs. Not a chance. Tim scoffs. You Waynes are a different kind of stubborn, you know that? Like you want to talk, Duke mutters under his breath. Tim throws him a confused look, but then they're taking the final turn and arriving into the dining room. The others are already there, gathered around the table, speaking to each other in hushed voices, but immediately silence upon seeing Tim. Tim does his best not to shrink under that scrutiny, taking in the room and trying to make some fast paced deductions while he can. First, this isn't one of their usual weekly dinners where whoever is available comes if they can. Who Everyone is here. Barbara, Dick, Cass, Jason, Steph, Duke, Damien, Bruce, and Alfred. The whole family. Tim hasn't seen them all together in one room since he doesn't even know when. Second, Cass and Steph shouldn't be here. They weren't scheduled to come back from their assignment for another day. Meaning Bruce called them back early. Third, shit. Cass is here. Have a seat, Bruce directs before Tim can really start to panic. Damien steps up without a word, takes his arm, and bodily drags him towards a seat near the center of the table. Tim hardly notices, his mind working overtime to come up with some sort of plan to deal with this fresh new hell. There's no way he's escaping this evening with all of his secrets intact. He doesn't know what conclusions Cars will draw, seeing as the truth is so far outside the realm of possibility, but there isn't a version of this where Cass doesn't see the right through him. She was trained to know people better than they know themselves, and Tim's always been bad at lying to her. That's fine, he tells himself almost desperately. He can deal with that. Damien already knows more about him than he ever intended. The family already knows he's got a bleeding heart deep down. It doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things because they don't know the truth. And they never will. Even more so than last time, the most dangerous move he could make in this situation would be to lie. Cass is too good. She'll see through it. It would only give them more reason to dig into him. And if Barbara was so determined, he's not sure his little mind game in his security would be enough to fool her anymore. The best way to deal with this is to be calm, cool, and as honest as he can be, or face the wrath of Cass if they're insisting on what? Making friends with him? Pulling him out of his self-inflicted isolation? Can let them try. Let them think it will last. The fact is, Tim isn't the type of person one hangs around for. He's known it since he was a child, was reminded as a teenager, and then relived it all over again. He's expendable, a placeholder, a pit stop in another person's story. Eventually, something more important will take their attention. Some crisis, some mission, some real member of the family who needs them. And Tim will fade again, slip through the cracks like he always does. It's not like they'd ever tell Timothy Drake big family secrets. Not really. So whatever this is, whatever weird campaign they're on to include him, it won't last. Damien's internship only has a few more weeks left anyway. After that, it might finally be time for Tim to take a break, a real one, leave Gotham for a while. Could say he's scouting new opportunities for the company, chasing international partnerships, maybe set up temporary operations in Hong Kong or Shanghai, a business retreat, a strategic expansion, something to keep them at bay, and enough time and distance for them to forget. But for now, at this moment, the only way out is through. He can manage this with minimal damage. He thought all of that last time, didn't he? Tim's mind tumbles through these conclusions in the time it takes for Damien to direct him into his seat, which he takes as gracefully as he can manage. He's been set squarely in the middle of the entire family. Bruce sits at the head of the table, as always, with to his right and Damien to his left. Tim is next to Damien, with Cass on his other side. On the opposite side of the table, next to Dick, are Jason, Steph, and Duke, respectively, with Barbara taking the other end of the table in her wheelchair. It places Tim right across from both Steph and Jason, while looking at him with equally concerning, mischievous expressions. Tim swallows. He hasn't seen Steph in years. She has no reason to come to the events the others are required to attend, no reason to interact with Timothy Drake at all. She was once his best friend, his closest confidant, long after their romantic relationship fell apart. They weren't meant for each other that way, but they always loved one another. Seeing her hurts just as much as he expected it to. And then there's Cass to his left, his only sister. The girl who saw him when no one else did, made him feel loved even when he deemed himself unlovable. He can feel her eyes studying him, ever calculating and knowing, reading him as easily as one reads a book. So, Tim smiles, not his gala smile, but something a bit more real, hoping that harnessing a bit of his actual happiness at seeing them might counter whatever grief he's surely projecting to Cass's astute gaze. I don't think we've met. Tim starts towards both girls, introducing himself to the women who once saved him from himself. Timothy Drake. Stephanie Brown, Steph replies, her expression open, eyes flickering off his face with unmistakable curiosity. But I believe you can call me Steph. Tim glances at Cass, who gives him a warm smile. Cass, she says simply. Tim smiles back. It's good to meet you both, he says sincerely. Master Jason, Master Dick, Alfred says to the two eldest. I have everything plated in the kitchen. Would you be so kind as to help me bring it in? Course, Alfie, Jason says easily, and he and Dick follow Alfred into the kitchen. Do you know of Barbara Gordon? Bruce asked him, gesturing towards the other side of the table where she sits. She's a family friend of ours. Tim nods. Of course, the commissioner's daughter, though I know of you better from your work with Gotham Public Library. You've done incredible things there. Barbara blinks, then smiles, surprisedly. Tim knows she isn't often people actually recognize her for her own accomplishments rather than her father's, at least not in civilian life. He and Barbara were once close too, for a time. They always had each other's backs before Jason returned, before Damien arrived, before the birds of prey began taking most of her attention. She helped him through his experience at the hand of the Joker. She even helped him train him in his early days. But after her injury, they naturally drifted apart. One of his biggest regrets is not being able to prevent her injury entirely this time around. But it has been nice to work so frequently with her again. even if it's only remote. Do you visit the library often? Barbara asked, with a quirk of her eyebrow. Not anymore, Tim admits, but I used to all the time when I was a kid. Barbara hums. Why did you stop? Tim opens and closes his mouth, hyper aware of Cass's eyes on him. The truth is, of course, he used to go there as a kid because it was one of the few places a child could go without their parents and not draw too much unwanted attention. It's actually why he first met Barbara, back when he was 7, though he doubts she remembers that now. He started going less often once his obsession with Batman and Robin really took hold. And after he woke up in his 10-year-old body, he stopped going altogether. I just got distracted by other things, he says simply. Honestly. Barbara smiles a bit. Well, you'd be welcome any time. It'd be fun to see you there. Tim's brain stutters. Uh, yeah, that'd be nice. Alfred comes in and with the boys, and together they lay everyone's plates in front of them. It's a simple enough meal as far as the Wayne family goes. Steak with mashed potatoes, a mushroom sauce, and artichoke on the side. Tim can't help but smile. Artichokes were always one of his favorites. It's been a while since he's had them, considering he's not much of a cook himself, besides the basics, and rarely goes out to eat at the sort of restaurant that would serve them. Everyone begins to dig in, and for a while, no one speaks to Tim. It's not awkward, exactly. More like they're deliberately giving him space, like they're letting him adjust. Bruce starts asking Dick about work and Jason about his schooling, while Duke peppers Steph and Cars with questions about their recent travels. Censored, of course. Tim wonders if his sudden departure last time made them more cautious around him, treating him like an easily startled newborn bird, as if one wrong move might send him fleeing again. Tim hates that they're right. Tim listens contentedly to their scattered conversations, quietly talking down his anxiety the whole time, while also fending off the numbness trying to take hold of him. After a while, though, the sound of conversation becomes less panic-inducing and more calming, like he's listening in on the bad comms on any other night in his safe room. The familiar cadence soothes him, and before he knows it, he's managed to finish more than half his plate. He looks up and catches the glass glancing at him with that quiet, knowing expression. Tim wonders just how much she's already gouged from him, how much she's already seen on his carefully crafted mask. Then, almost subconsciously, Tim realizes a voice is distinctly missing from the chatter. He gazes over at Damien by his side. The teen is eating his food quietly, his eyes distant, like his mind is somewhere else. Tim nudges him gently with his eye elbow. You alright? He murmurs quietly. Damien shoots him a side eye, guarded and stiff. Why wouldn't I be? He replies, voice clipped. You're quiet, Tim observes softly. So are you, Damien counters pointedly. Tim shrugs one shoulder. It's not my family dinner. Damien slams his fork down onto his plate, casting a loud tang, and turns to Tim with a spark of fire in his eyes Tim hasn't seen in years. Damien, Bruce's voice cuts through warningly. Damien scowls and immediately slumps back into his chair like his strings have been cut. Tim frowns, at a complete loss. What is going on with him today? So, Tim, Bruce sidesteps the moment seamlessly, like it didn't even happen. How have things been at DI since we last talked? Tim straightens a bit, following his lead and easily slipping into CEO mode. Familiar territory. Uh, Steady, despite the mishaps. While expanding the R&D budget, I've also been vetting a few new department heads. Bruce nods, approving. Smart, delegation will be crucial if you want to scale without burning out. Tim gives a non-committal shrug, but before he can say more, Steph groans theatrically, cutting in. Are we really going to talk about business right now? She turns to Jason with mock outrage. Is that what happened last time? No wonder he left. I would have too. Jason barks out a laugh. My thoughts. Next time I'll be talking about quarterly projections. Only if you ask nicely. Tim responds dry but amused. Seth has always been this blunt way about her that just brings Tim out of his head and into the present. He's naturally more himself around her, more snarky and sarcastic in response to her own sass. Oh no, I am putting my foot down, Steph insists. We are not talking about work. This is a social setting, Timothy. We do banter and mockery here. Those are the rules. Tim raised an eyebrow, feigning confusion. Mockery? Internally, he's debating with himself if he should engage in sad banter. Banter is dangerous. Banter is personal. Banter is exposing, but well, Cass is already here anyway. Besides, this might be the only time he gets to engage with staff like this, on any level, in this timeline, in this life. Oh, absolutely, she deadpans. You've been way too quiet. She leans closer, leaning against her elbows on the table, her expression going mischievous. I want to know everything about you. Tim almost wishes she did, but no. She doesn't know him like she used to, doesn't carry any of their shared past. Their jokes, their fights, their victories. She's Steph, and he's just someone who gets to be around her. If this moment is all he has, he might as well make good it a good one. So yeah, he'll banter. Tim tilts his head as if considering her request. Everything? Steph grins. Everything, she echoes. Deepest fears, most embarrassing childhood memories. Your skincare routine, especially that last one. Because seriously, how the hell do you look like that? Tim plays along, sighing dramatically. I can't help you there. Genetics, I'm afraid. Steph deflates, as if put upon. God damn it! Why do the boys always get the luck? Patriarchy, he replies instantly. Dick snorts into his drink, while Cass smirks over the rim of her glass. Oh, for God's sake! Damien mutters in an annoyed voice, sounding a bit like a disgruntled Alfred. It reminds Tim so strongly of before, of Damien's annoyance every time the mood struck Tim and Steph to do something especially rambunctious. Partners in crime. Steph rolls her eyes. Don't listen to the demon brat. He's allergic to fun. Tim laughs, actually laughs. It's a quiet sound. Nothing that outwardly draws anyone's attention, but to Tim it feels good, familiar in a way that he allows to warm him up. He catches Duke smiling in his direction, almost like he's happy to see it too. Let's start with basics, Steph continues unperturbed. Favorite color? Tim thinks about it, deciding to indulge in a bit of mischief. Probably blue. As expected, Jason straightens, a shit eating grin on his face. Any particular reason? Or better yet, Dick jumps in, grinning just as wide. Any particular shade? There's a glint in Tim's eyes, but expression remains perfectly neutral. A picture of innocence, as if he doesn't know what they're getting at. Sky blue, he says, like it's the most boring, obvious answer in the world. Both brothers deflate. Tim hums. Dick hums. Not, I don't know, cerulean? Or royal blue, maybe? Tim cocks his head to the side, squinting slightly like he's genuinely putting thought into it, then shakes his head. Nope. Jason rolls his eyes, muttering something under his breath that Tim doesn't quite catch. Duke chuckles, staring things along. Okay, what about hobbies? Tim squints at him. Hobbies? Yeah, Duke nods. What do you do in your free time? You assume I have free time. Everyone has free time sometime. Barbara joins. You're a gamer? You seem the type. I used to be. Tim agrees, but not for a while. Do you cook? Bake? Jason tries. Tim scoffs. Why would I want to set my house on fire? Dancer? Cass offers, a little too hopefully. Sorry to disappoint, but no, he shakes his head. I'm actually fairly clumsy. It isn't even a lie. Tim has always been gangly and uncoordinated. He had to work hard to train himself out of it, first for public events like galas, and then on a higher level for bat training. But even now, when his mind is somewhere else, it isn't exactly uncommon for him to trip over his own 2 feet. Coordination is something he earned, not something that came naturally. Still, his statement is met with multiple dubious looks, as if they're honestly trying to find that hard to believe. I've seen him sleep deprived, Damien mutters. He isn't wrong. Tim throws him a look. How would you know if I was sleep deprived? When are you sleep deprived? Damien accuses. Tim opens and closes his mouth, at a loss for how to respond to that. That's a bit of an exaggeration, he decides. It's not. Anyway, Bruce intervenes quickly, but Tim thinks he catches the bear smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth. Back to your hobbies. You have to do something outside of work, surely. Tim shrugs. Sorry to disappoint, but I rarely do anything just for fun of it anymore. Thinks. He's a photographer, he states assuredly. It's only years of practice that stops Tim from jolting. Yes, photography is probably the only thing that he does that could be considered a proper hobby, but that's both personal and practical goal to his job as Cardinal. It isn't something anyone really knows about or has ever known about. Even in the last timeline, the only people who he ever told about it were Cass, Steph, and Dick when he brought him proof of Batman's actions, when he was trying to convince him to go back to being Robin. There's no way Damien would know about it. Well, there was that one time, but no, that was then. This is now. Unless. Has Damien seen him spying? No, that's impossible. Tim's meticulous. I've heard about any surveillance shadow on the comms. Swallowing the sudden rush of tension, Tim keeps calm and turns to Damien slowly, keeping his voice steady. How did you know that? Damien shifts uneasily under Tim's gaze, avoiding eye contact for a moment. He clears his throat as if realizing he said too much. I did my research on you before I started. You are credited as the winner of an urban landscape competition some years ago. Tim's brows crease in thought. To him, it's been what feels like 20 years since that actually happened, but Damien is right. He applied to an exhibition when he was 8, put in all his monthly allowance to get the photo professionally printed and framed and delivered to the gallery himself. He didn't know how to create an alias back then, so it was under his name. Though he didn't really think anyone would connect it to him. Timothy Drake, the Drake heir. He thought he was lucky enough to even get into the competition back then. He never expected to win it. It was one of his proudest accomplishments before he became Robin. Damien eyes him like trying to gauge Tim's reaction without being too obvious about it. He's worried, nervous about Tim's reaction, probably because he got the information through decidedly unorthodox means, aka bad sleuthing, but certainly not normal practice. He doesn't realize how lucky he is that it's Tim he's talking to, someone who has long since known about and utilizes the same techniques. Huh, Tim huffs instead, like he's simply surprised and not startled as he actually was. You're certainly thorough. Really? Dick smiles softly, looking genuinely interested. You're a photographer. Tim clears his throat. This is getting a little too close, too familiar. I dabble, he mutters. Amateur photographers rarely win professional competitions, Bruce states pointedly. It was a little while ago, he says dismissively, taking his fork and pushing the remaining food around on his plate. Barbara leans in from her wheelchair, eyes sharp. When exactly? I feel like I would have heard about the Drake Air winning something like that. Tim glances up at the ceiling. Let's think, he deadpan. He was 8 at the time. Damien adds, so very helpfully. Tim throws him a glare his way before catching himself. 8? Damn. So you've always been an overachiever? Jason snorts with little heat. Good to know. Tim continues to push his food around, determinedly not looking at anyone as he feels his face warm. That's incredible, Tim, Bruce says adamantly with what sounds like real pride creeping into his voice. Nope, nope, not thinking about that. I'm sure your parents were very proud. Tim laughs, but even to his own ears, it sounds hollow. You could say that. What's your focus? Gus asks after a moment. Tim feels like he's in a fever dream. Is this a fever dream? It would actually make more sense than his current reality. Urban nightlife, he says without thinking, feeling almost like he's on autopilot. The whole table gazes at him with various levels of surprise. But like I said, it's been a while. You take photos of Gotham? Bruce adds, doing a convincing job at keeping his tone neutral. At night? That's a bit dangerous, no? Dick Pig hypes up. Tim shrugs. Seems pretty safe to me these days. Could be worse. A lot worse, he doesn't add. Duke is the one to ask the dreaded question, leaning forward and smiling mischievously. You ever catch any photos of the bats? Once or twice, he replies easily, as nonchalant as he can be. Who's your favorite? Jason asks. Tim frowns. Favorite? Favorite bat? Tim huffs and smiles a bit. Robin, replies without hesitation. Damien startles, looking at Tim with what seems to be shock. Duke rolls his eyes. Typical. Steph shakes her head in agreement. I expected more from you, Timon. Is Robin a bit basic? I think you mean classic. But which Robin is the real question? Dick leans closer. Tim smirks, taking another bite of his steak. Wouldn't you like to know, circus boy? Steph throws her head back and laughs. I like him. He can stay. The night continues on like that. Some light teasing here, some banter there. Everyone surprisingly at ease with one another. Tim is in a daze the whole time, sometimes just content to simply exist in the moment, sometimes fighting back his anxiety and rising panic until he inevitably gets distracted again. He lets time slip by, eventually deciding it's to allow himself to forget for a while. Forget the heartache that's sure to come for him later. Forget the lifelong desire to have this exactly as it is. A family without so much bad blood between them, years of hunting and being hurt and hurting by each other. It isn't perfect. No family is, but to Tim, it's damn near close. I did this, Tim thinks to himself. He made it possible. And even if it isn't his anymore, it's enough that it's theirs. Tim allows him to persuade him to stay for dessert, happily surprised when Alfred reveals he's made homemade donuts for them. Tim picks up his pastry gingerly and takes a bite at a perfectly glazed masterpiece. He has to hold in a groan because it's absolute heaven. Did they do their research on him to find out what he likes? They must have, though Tim rarely indulges in such things anymore. How did how did Alfred know? Bruce clears his throat, distracting Tim from his inner musings. I know we've probably kept you long enough, he says, but you're welcome to stay as long as you like. We usually do a game night when we're all together like this. Yeah, stay, duck boy, Steph says. I think I could take you in Scrabble. Tim raised an eyebrow at the nickname. Is that a Drake pun? Steph shrugs. Yeah, okay, it's not my best work, but not the point. You in? For a second, Tim is tempted. Why not? He's already come this far, but then again, he's already too far. He has to do damage control now, or at least try to mitigate the effects this night will have on him. Tim knows himself. His mental health was abysmal before and isn't all that much better this time. But he's not a masochist. If he wants to protect a semblance of his peace, he can't stay. No, I'm afraid I really should get going. Tim is looking down while he says it, but even so, he can feel the atmosphere dip. The gathering isn't happy with that decision. Jason lets out a loud sigh and opens his mouth to say something before someone, either Dick or Steph, kicks him under the table. From the glare Dick is giving him, Tim is betting on him. Of course, Dick says with a smile. Just know that we're always close by if you need anything. Dick holds his eye, almost pleadingly. You're always welcome here, Tim. Thank you. Tim swallows and clears his throat, trying to dislodge the lump he can feel rising. I'll just call a cab, I suppose. No need, Master Tim. Alfred interjects. The mechanics just informed me that the problem has been resolved. You can drive yourself. Tim can't help but laugh. That's that was convenient timing. Alfred gives him nothing away. Indeed it is, sir. Cass stands. I'll walk you out. Tim opens and closes his mouth. He'd really prefer not to be alone with Cass if possible, but he knows better than to argue. So Tim follows her lead and stands, giving the family an awkward wave. Thank you for having me. We'll see you soon, Tim, Jason tells him, and it sounds less like a promise and more like a fact. Tim flees without another word, slowing down to let Cass catch up with him only once he's a good way down the hall. Cass doesn't try to start a conversation, so Tim doesn't either, knowing she oftentimes prefers silence to useless words. They walk side by side together through the twists and turns of the corridors, silently until they finally reach the entryway again. It was good to meet you, Cass, Tim mutters at the door. Cass nods, self-assured. Yes, it was. That shocks a laugh out of Tim. He smiles at her, nods once, and turns away to finally make his escape. When Cass calls after him, how long do you think you can keep this up? She asks, her voice quiet but unwavering. Tim halts, his hand on the knob of the door. He's so close. Keep what up? He asks. without looking, carrying on all by yourself. You can feel her stepping closer. Everyone needs people, Tim. I have people. No, you don't. Not really. Tim wishes he could disagree. He has enough connections for his essential needs, but not nearly enough to be happy. He wishes he could let himself have more people, but he's long since learned his lesson in that regard. It's better not to risk it. Better not to give himself hope. Good night, Miss Kane. Tim opens the door and is gone. End of chapter 16. I hope you enjoyed it, and see you next week. Thank you for listening.